Hello and welcome back. Today we're diving into our first master study of Harold Septimus Power's Australian landscapes. We'll get to that in a second. I have a lot of his paintings here and it was really hard to choose just one to study, so I had to just pick one, and I have. The one we are going to study today is this one. Power really knew how to make the most of a brushstroke, that's for sure, and just nail the feel of the light and the colour. The low resolution image here is a bit of a pain, but it's also a bit of a plus because it strips away the extra detail and lets us focus on the big shapes and the logic behind the composition, which we will do now. So I think that this is actually a steel yard composition, and I'll show you why. It's about balancing the weights. This one is huge. This one is smaller. This one over here is larger, but it's not as big as this one. And it goes off the page, but it's lighter. So this is all balanced. He uses this heavy tree here as an anchor, right near the center point. The line is here, so the center point would be here, so this is very close. He also balances that weight with the rider, which I would argue is closer to the center point than this tree, but is a lot smaller. We have a little dog here too, but it's a lot smaller. And then we have this tree. It's out further, but it's a lot lighter. It's not as heavy as this one here. So he uses it for a lot of leverage, which keeps the whole image from feeling lopsided. The tree on the far left also acts as a vertical stop. As we're looking through this image, we're going this way, because that's the direction of all the focal areas, but this tree stops it from just exiting the picture here. Now these rolling hills in the background as well, I think they bridge these anchors. So this tree is an anchor, this one here. We've also got these lines here. I would argue that this is the focus. Even less than that, I think this is the focus. And I say that because look, this is the darkest dark. Look at this one pointing this way. This line going here, it stops. It kind of balances these ones that are going like that, which is interesting. So with these hills in the background, he's creating some really nice rhythmic lines. And it's continuing on here. It's echoed here as well. And the sky, which is, I would say, is the negative space of this image. It gives us room to breathe. It gives us room to rest our eyes. But he also has made this, it's not boring because you can see his brush strokes. Although this is a very low resolution image, you can kind of make out the strokes that he's used that are very deliberate. So we know the big tree is our anchor, this one here. But this deadwood I mentioned before acts as a funnel, and they point right to the rider. Even this here is very important too. It points right to the rider. If you squint, you can see a line going right through. I think without this tree here, it would just go off into the distance. So this tree is just as important as this horse and rider. These broken branches are interesting because they do a number of things, like I mentioned before, but they're also pointing back to the tree as well. So we've got a lot of lines going around down here in different directions, but Harold seems to be able to make this work. I think they're all purposefully done. He uses the dark paint on the trunk and the underside of that bent branch to create a counterforce, which I mentioned before. So I think this is a big counterforce, this here. So if you look how he handles the atmospheric perspective or distance, we can see down in front he's used a pretty neutral sandy colour, it's even a bit cool in some spots like here and here. Very neutral, very almost cool leaning in those areas there. And then when we get to the focal area, it warms up considerably. There's a lot brighter, there's a lot more contrast. In the shadow areas, there's a lot more contrast with this blue-green, and we know that the horse is the darkest dark along with these parts here. These are the darkest parts of the painting. So if we keep moving back, you can see the warm and cool tones playing off. This hill is a little bit warmer, this one is a little bit cooler. So he's playing temperatures off each other. Warmer, cooler, and then we get to the sky, which is in cool blues and greys, and it's the furthest in the distance. So there's a lot of contrast going through here, very, very subtle and very deliberate. But as you move back through, you can see it's a sense of rhythm where we've got neutrals, we've got contrast, we've got warm, we've got cool, so it all plays together quite nicely. And the tree itself is super warm on this side here. Even though it's subtle, we've got a lot of warms here. And even these browns, they're very warm on the areas that are hitting the sun. And then in the shadow area, we have the reflection of the sky, so these are a lot cooler and more blue-greys. And in the leaves as well, they're a really cool green. So that's interesting to make a note. So all of these things are good to make a note of, because these are things that I'm going to be trying to apply to a study of this. Now, if we look at this in grayscale, I did that before, but take another look here. It really gives us another view on his composition and the focal elements, and you can see exactly where the heaviest parts are. The horse and that dark band on the bottom. This line I mentioned before, you can really see that now, as well as the horse. So it points right at the horse. The horse direction is coming towards us. So that's something to make a note of. We can also see how the horse pops because it's the darkest shape against the mid-tones of the hill here. Around, these are all the mid-tones. There is variation, mostly variation in temperature, I would say, but they're very close together in this mid-tone. Now the tree trunk is an interesting one because it is mostly mid-tone as well. If you blur your eyes, this is almost a lost edge here along here. But it's the same value or similar values to the hills and to the foreground. So what makes this stand out, not only is it the sky, the lighter value in the sky in the background, but this darker side of the tree. Especially down the bottom. If we come back to these darks again, these darks play such a huge role in this. There's also, if we didn't have these trees up here, these leaves are doing a lot of heavy lifting because they're quite dark and they have more contrast against the sky. Without the trees there, if you put your hand over, if you cover up that part, that tree trunk would almost just blend into the background. So these leaves, the darker values in these leaves, cap this area off. All the values apart from this, the darkest darks, are all fairly close. They're all just, a step or two away from each other until we get to those focal areas. And if we go back to colour, we can see how vibrant he has actually been able to make this, but it's not from making drastic value changes apart from the focal area. It's actually from his colours and his temperature. So while the rider and the dog are a little bit of a blur, you can see if I zoom in, it's just, you can't really see much detail. Check out the foreground and this main tree. We can see more detail in that, so we can see the strokes. The brushwork in the foreground is quite thick, and it looks like he might have had an old crusty brush to get those almost wispy ends here. And even in the grass is here. And the grass really has directional marks just to build that ground plane in the foreground. Even so, we can see part of the canvas in the back underneath coming through here and here, which is very characteristic of some of his paintings, of the ones like these. On the tree trunk, he uses broad, confident strokes to define the tree and the form and the bark texture as well, so that'll be a little bit of a challenge to try and make the brush work for me with that one. And even on the hills, the brushwork follows the contour, you can see. Look at these big brush strokes that he's used. So I think Harold really knows how to make his brush do the heavy lifting for him, and that knowledge came with years of experience of painting. And remember, in his history, he ran away at 14 because he wanted to be an artist, and he painted animal heads on butcher vans. So all of that experience from such a young age, he has built the knowledge and expertise to be able to handle a brush like this, which is phenomenal, because at first glance you might think, oh, this is really rough, but if you try to reproduce something like this, you'll find how technical it actually is. So we are going to have to learn from what we can see in his brushwork and try to apply it to the areas which are too blurry, like this horse and this dog, which may have only been a few brush strokes itself, but hopefully I can translate his style to this area. Like I said, the hills might look simple, but it can be deceptively tricky to get paint to work the way that he has. Each stroke stands on its own, and also the colour variations of each stroke as well. This will be tricky to reproduce, but that's why we do studies. The clouds in the sky is something I'm not very experienced with at the moment. I have never really done a cloud study in oils, but I can see how the clouds have their own subtle shadows in here. A very light blue, a lavenderish grey. So we'll see how close I can get, and I'll just do my best to remember all of this, because that is the hardest part when you're doing the study, is to remember all the things that you've pulled apart. Now it's time to bring out the paints and get stuck into the study, so I'll see you on the easel. So here we are. I'm using an old MDF board that has some water damage in one corner. I don't know if you can see it, but I sanded it down and put a thin layer of gesso over it and decided that it was good enough to use for a study, and that's why you can still see a few bumps on the right hand side. My aim here was just to get a base to paint on, so I did a thin coat of the general colours I thought I would be using. I put a darker value on the grass in the middle ground and lightly indicated where the tree would be. But notice the brush I'm using, it's a nice size, but it's too soft. And what this brush did was blend the paint too much, making everything look very soft, which we know is the opposite of what Harold would have done. I don't know why I didn't realise it at the time. I think I was just concentrating on putting in those base values and thought that as it's the first base, it wouldn't matter, but I have to wonder if it actually did. Then I go straight into putting that rich red oxide burnt umber mix into the tree and indicate where the horse will go, and just create placeholders for most of the elements. It's all very rough, but once that is done, then I can start painting the painting and slowly refine everything. I did have a lot of fun with the tree. I just really love the contrast between the deep red oxides and the pale trunk. It was a visual treat for my eyes. And after that, I did start adding more shape and definition to the hills in the background. And this is more of trying to capture the values I can see in the original and the temperature of those values as well. Then I have a go at painting the clouds, and my reason for this is I'm not very practiced at cloud painting. I have never really sat down and painted dedicated cloud studies in oil paint, and it's probably something I should do in the future, but for now I'm just looking closely at Harold's painting and trying to replicate the shapes, the gestures and values of those clouds to the best of my ability. Now, in a couple of stages in this painting, I do go in and try and fix the horse and the rider a bit. The first shape was extremely rough, and I needed to make it better for me to feel better about continuing to paint this. It just kept drawing my attention on how much work it needed, so I did an initial pass to get the shapes closer to what I see in the original. And now this is very small, this painting. The original painting is much larger, so it was probably easier to get in there with a few good brush strokes, as we know Harold can do, but for me this was a bit frustrating. I used the knowledge I have with negative shapes between the horse's legs, knowing how the horse's head should be shaped, and I reduced its size and refined it as best I could, and even had another go at the rider later, but I did the best I could for now, and at least it wasn't standing out so much that it distracted me, and I decided I could move on to other areas. Now onto the foreground, which in the original is a lively weave of brushstrokes and subtle colour and temperature. For now, I just wanted to have a go at what that brushwork might have been like. And unfortunately, at one point, I bring out that big soft brush again, and it really doesn't work for this. I did swap to a more used hog hair brush, but that foreground grass it's actually deceptively hard to replicate. If I was doing an original with my own pattern of strokes that I could make up on the spot and the colours and temperatures, I think it would be a lot easier. It's a lot harder when you're using someone else's roadmap. And that's where I left it for the first day. I wanted it to be tacky before proceeding. The next day it was time to put in the cap on the tree, starting with painting in some branches over the sky, which was tacky by then, so it was easier to paint over without making a big mess. And that's why I did the sky and the clouds first. The leaves were interesting. I tried an angle brush that has a sharp edge, and that seemed to do the trick. And I'm using a cold blue-green because eucalyptus leaves are quite waxy and the mature leaves become very cool in temperature, and in the sunlight they reflect like little mirrors. And after that initial test block, I block in some of the rough areas of the bushy leaves because Harold isn't painting every single leaf, and neither will I. I am trying to vary the tones and temperature in there so it's not all the same blue-green. And I do add a little warm yellow-green for some of the younger leaves where the light is shining through them instead of being reflected. And that adds variety to the area and a little bit of interest. Next is more work on the main tree trunk, and at this stage I was having fun. I was listening to music with two small fans on. It was a hot day, the window was open, and it just felt like a really pleasant time. And this is the most ideal scenario for me when I'm painting and not necessarily struggling or getting frustrated with one part, letting it ruin the whole thing for me. Instead, I went on my merry way and I kept painting. I probably did fiddle around too much with the leaves on the tree, but man, I was enjoying every little bit of paint that went on. And then I started to put in a few sky holes so that cap wasn't too hard and let it have a little bit of airiness to it. I also tried to incorporate a few of those bolder brush strokes when I remembered. When I'm in the middle of painting and having a nice time for a change, I sometimes forget that I'm actually studying. So I do need to remember the things that I'm trying to learn. And I noticed while watching this back that I do tend to put things in a straight line as well without intending to, like some of the leaves in a bunch that ended up being straight, or the grass that I ended up putting in too straight in a straight line. So I had to go back and mix that around a little bit with some sky holes and new leaves and different paint strokes. I'm aware of that tendency now, so hopefully I will be able to spot it early on and be conscious about how I'm making my marks. The tree is coming along nicely now, so it's time to move on to some of the other elements that need more work. The broken branches under the tree were a challenge, and I did have a mistake in there with the sky, and I needed to fix that. I think I fixed it. I noticed it a little bit later on, and I fixed that mistake. And then once I did that, I defined the light and shadow sides of those branches, and it seemed to work better. Although at the time I'm editing this, I still have a couple of things to fix, and one of them is that forwardmost bent branch, which I'll add a highlight more like how Harold has done it, and I'll show it at the end. I did spend a bit of time on those bent branches because they were an integral part. I felt that they were an integral part of the composition and an important element to help draw the eye around. Now, I recorded this over multiple days, so in a moment you'll see the next part, which will be the last part of this painting. But I'll give you a few minutes. You're watching an hour and 40 minutes of jumping around looking for where I want to add more details, which can be where the magic happens or things start to get overworked. Most people would edit this out to look efficient, but this is where the actual work sometimes happens, and I wanted to include it. So for your sake, I have sped this up, and for now I will let you relax and enjoy while I give you a few final thoughts and reflections from my time studying our master. I have spent weeks deep diving into Harold Septimus Power, and what I realised is that even his own style evolved over the years. Between his early works where we can see him striving for perfection over style and his more earthy palettes, he's adding brighter colours and thicker paint with juicy bold brushwork while in London and Paris, I think under the influence of the Impressionists of the day, and then his powerful works during the war as a war artist, which we see a return of his more sombre palette choices, to after the war and into his later years where Harold returned to the big bold character of the Australian bush, where our scenery really does shine like his paintings. By this time, he had the experience, knowledge and confidence to wield his brush as a master, and that's where he seems to be the happiest with his paintings. And we, the viewers, get to see his brightest and most colourful works. There has been a lot of value for me in studying Harold, because for me, the learning gives me a sense of discovery and wonder, seeing how the pieces fit, seeing how many more pieces there were that I didn't even see at first. It can get overwhelming, and I would be lying if I said that learning from a master is easy, because sometimes it really isn't. I have to be patient, I have to be observant, I have to remember the thing I was trying to practice. I want to understand it and be able to mould it over in my mind and really be able to wield that skill for myself. But that takes time and a lot of paint and a lot of patience. It also teaches me to be kind to the work I'm doing, to learn to have faith in myself that I can learn this thing. I think we forget all the incidental lessons along the way. We often think the goal is a masterpiece or is the masterpiece, but what about the deliberate practice? The isolating of one technique, one directional brushstroke, or one specific shape or colour? I feel that's a key part of how I study and how I deal with the duds, because repeating failures isn't going to fix them. My progress comes from analysing them, trying to find the problem and deconstruct where I think I need more practice, and narrowing my focus down to just that thing, then bringing it all together again and seeing if I have made progress. Now, sometimes that's harder than just pushing through a painting and hoping for the best, because I have to accept that while I may have gotten lucky with several paintings in the past, I want to understand and build that skill so I don't need to rely on luck. I can identify the problem and fix it. Luck is just too fickle for me. Now, here is one of the bigger lessons I have learned overall. If you aren't willing to paint a bad horse, you'll never paint a powerful one. I also want to say a few thoughts about how there's a pressure now to make art that fits an algorithm, to be fast, consistent, and perfect. Anyone who has been watching my progress will know that's not me. I have tried in the past, but it burdens me with a weight I just can't carry for long without wanting to give everything up. and I have done that in the past. I want my home studio to be a place where I can just sit down to paint if I want to. I need to be able to reject the world and its social media nonsense sometimes, and that's why it seems I take breaks often. I'm just one person doing everything, and I find the internet side of things soul-crushing sometimes. It's just too cutthroat for me. I do still try sometimes, but it's not something I enjoy doing. And however, there is one bright side to it, and that's when I get the odd comment. I love to read them and reply to them, and that's the only bright side I have seen to social media and YouTube so far. But I also have personal limitations that I work with. Among other health issues, I deal mostly with bouts of fatigue and an extremely sensitive back. In fact, my back went out in a big way when I bent in a slightly awkward way a couple of weeks ago, and the impact was that I could barely move for the first few days, and I did try to continue painting, but sitting at the easel and leaning forward doing one of the other studies that I was working on was just too much. So I had to wait it out until I could sit up more comfortably to do this study. So this study that you were watching took a little bit longer. It's better now, I'm fine now, but it's an ongoing issue I have had for an extremely long time, and I just have to be very careful. But anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm doing the best that I can to show up for myself and for painting and for the few viewers that I might have, and I do appreciate you. So that's my story for this master study. The full journey, the insights, the trials and tribulations. I learned quite a bit about our master, and I really could identify with his preference for the dignity of the struggle, of his war horses, his working horses, the draft horses, the logging horses, and the riders in the Australian outback and our beautiful scenery. There is a story about Harold in his final years, a kindly old man with an unlit cigarette hanging from the bottom of his lip, still obsessing over the basics of the craft until his last day. I think that's a great image to end with. I don't think it's about checking a box or making sure I post an image on time or even finishing a video for the sake of the upload. Instead, I think he would say it's the persistent effort of standing your ground against things that want to slow you down, whether that's a bad back or the daily struggle in today's seemingly hostile world. So for the future, I will do a few more shorter studies of Harold's paintings, and I will upload them soon. But I also want to try and take what I have learned from him and apply it to my own paintings. And I have started one of those already in the early stages. So look forward to that when it arrives. And again, I really appreciate my viewers, and I do appreciate the comments. I love to reply to them, so leave one if you wish. And I will see you in the next video. I will just let this play out and let you enjoy it.